Yeah, everybody, I think we can all agree that was a fantastic meal we just had, so thank you very much to the team once again for putting that together for us. So we're just going to move on to our panel session this evening. So also, obviously the theme of our conference is around sustainability, so I don't think we can have a much better panel surrounding me tonight to discuss that very topic. Just for a bit of housekeeping, the panel is being streamed live on the SAYFC Facebook, and if there is anyone on here who would like to ask some questions, then please do so. We'll get one of the team to convey the questions over to us. So I'd just like to start off by introducing my panel tonight. So on my far left I have Nikki Yoxall. So Nikki is an educator and first generation farmer based in the northeast of Scotland. Her and her husband run Grampian Graziers, working with local landowners to graze cattle for ecological and biodiversity benefit, while selling 100% pasture and tree-fed beef to the local community. She also works with Pasture for Life to support the links between academic research and knowledge exchange and farmers and members. She also sits on the Nature Friendly Farming Network Scotland and is a board member of Nature Scotland. On my near left I have Chris Leslie, who is the Director of Cloud Farming. So since their incorporation in 2017, Cloud Farming has assisted clients by providing in-depth farming strategies with a focus on regenerative farming solutions and proper soil management. They've also leveraged business and professional relationships to provide cost-effective farming solutions. And for those tomorrow who have chosen to go on that farm visit, we are going to visit Chris Leslie tomorrow on one of the farm visits. On my near right, I have Mr. John Gold, who is a business advisory director with Johnson Carmichael. He started with them in June this year in the Stirling office. He has over 25 years experience advising owner-managed businesses, providing commercial accountancy, business advisory and taxation advice. John works in business advisory and has a diverse portfolio of clients with particular specialisms in agriculture and professional services. And on my far right we have David Carruth, who was this year the recipient of the Farm Woodland Young People's Award from Scotland's Finest Woods 2023. David is an agroforester, farming pigs at Broadclare, a 430 acre regenerating woodland in North Ayrshire, focusing on carbon capture and increased soil health and biodiversity, with the high quality forest raised pork being sold under the banner of the Woolly Pig Company. And he was telling us tonight they've just set up Christmas boxes with their pork, so if anyone would like to buy any of those boxes, then you're welcome. And to put them in layman's terms, he is Paul Carruth, Paul from Young Farmer's brother. Without further ado, we'll start today's panel. Thank you. So obviously on the topic of sustainability, I'd like to start off by asking the panel kind of where they are now and how they got there, and kind of what the biggest challenges were on that journey. So we'll start off with
Thank you very much. Yes, it's been an interesting last decade, to say the least. Where have we got to? So we really had the idea for Cloud in 2015. It came out with the Rural Leadership Programme. I met my business partner James in there, never met him before, didn't know who he was. We came up with the idea of Cloud Farming. Both of us were farm managers on fairly big units, and we decided to come up with something that would rival contract farming. So a couple of years later, we actually came out of the rural leadership with a business, which is the only business that have actually managed that in their 15 or 20 years they've been going. So I'll tell you, it took some doing. It wasn't as simple as they said on the advertisement at the start, which is a life lesson. So off we went, thinking we'd go and revolutionise industry and everything else, which, as we all know, that doesn't happen very often. So we ended up basically taking on what we could get at the time and going from there to get a start. And now we've ended up, we do agronomy, we do advisory, we'll do fair plans, we do contract farming, we do stubble to stubble, we do rented, and we do tenanted. So bang went the business plan pretty quick. On the sustainability side, both of us, so James is up in Angus and I'm down in East Lothian. We've both been no-till or passionate about it, probably in practice for the last 7 years, and then history of Mintil before that, into to build up the knowledge probably for about the previous 10 years. And up to the current date, we are just starting to get into the carbon side of things. So we've been doing carbon credits now for about 3 years. So we've managed to get that going, and we are just looking forward to the next round of policy coming in 2025 for us.
Thanks so much for inviting me to come and speak this evening. It's a real pleasure and privilege. So yeah, I've been living in North East Scotland now for 6 years, first generation farmer. Come from an equine background in Shropshire, but we moved up to Scotland for my old job, which was in education. So I was working for the University of the Highlands and Islands, which I left a few years ago. So I used to be head of department at an agricultural college down south, and just realised that working in education but not in agriculture, I was there was the gap between what I really wanted to be doing and what I was actually doing was getting too wide. So for the last 5 years, we've been running a 100% pasture and tree-fed beef business. But access to land is quite difficult for us as first generation farmers. I'm sure many of you will recognise that challenge. So we looked at what our skill set was, which was understanding how to produce good beef from grass because of the experience that we'd had down south, and how to undertake ecological surveys and look at soil and understand soil health. So we started building a package with various local landowners to say, if we bring our cattle onto your land, and we can absolutely guarantee you gains in biodiversity and in soil health, can we negotiate favourable or non-existent rental payments? And that has become our business model. And that means that we can sell our beef at a price comparable to the supermarket. So I'm really passionate about good food being accessible to everybody. And currently we have this stratified system where if you don't have much income, you generally don't get to eat great food. And I think that's a real problem. So we really wanted to make sure that we could make our food accessible. I have such low input costs that I shouldn't have to charge more money. I shouldn't have to put a premium for it being 100% grass-fed. So for me, it's about finding a way to create really, really good quality product and then get that out to local people. As well as that kind of part of the business, so that's our farming business, I'm also a researcher, so I'm researching at the moment the transition to regenerative agriculture across the UK. So I've just been finishing all my fieldwork this year. And I also work with Pasture for Life, supporting farms to optimise and maximise production from forage, but in a kind of sustainable way that aligns with an ecological balance on farm. So I'm really sad there wasn't an opportunity for presentation, otherwise I'd have talked you through the wonders that is cow pats, because they're just amazing and full of life. If anyone was at the Women in Ag conference on Wednesday, they had to have 3 slides of cow shit before lunch, so you had to have that. So yeah, in terms of where I'm at, hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit about a very low cost business model as a new entrant, but also understanding how ecological knowledge can add value to your business beyond just being able to access EEC schemes, but as we look forward to new policy, how that's going to enable you to access the 50% of your BPS potentially that's going to be disappearing. So yeah, looking forward to exploring some of that this evening.
Thanks, Ian, guys. John Gold from Johnston Carmichael. I'm the only one on the panel who's not an active farmer, although I was brought up on a dairy farm in Fife. But what we're seeing from our side is really our clients who are adopting regen farming and sustainable farming. We have clearly the high input costs just now. More farmers are now being pushed towards looking for ways to reduce their costs through sustainable farming, regenerative farming. So we're seeing that coming through. We're seeing a lot on the carbon credit side as well with our clients. So just a varied mix within our client portfolio. And again, as I said, I'm not an active farmer, but we are seeing it come through with our clients.
Yeah, so if anybody knows Paul, you know that we grew up dairy farming. Both my grandfathers were dairy farmers, and I always wanted to follow them into farming. But we were made very painfully aware of, we weren't discouraged, but we were made very painfully aware of how difficult that might be. So I kind of went down and pursued my other interest, which was in conservation, which my grandfather sort of installed in me, sort of an understanding of the natural world and our environment through spending our time together on the farm and turning every pond and woodland and hedgerow into a lesson in some sort of earth science. So Ended up studying environmental science, specialising in sort of woodland creation, working all over the place, and then coming back into agriculture. And really what I wanted to show when I got the opportunity at Thornton Lee, we set ourselves a bit of challenges where we had to come in and farm essentially a blanket woodland that was under a woodland creation scheme, upland grazing, highish elevation, right on the coast. I think most farmers would have run a mile. But I was like, yeah, let's see what we can do, and we managed to figure out a system where we could keep that whole area agriculturally productive whilst going through regeneration of a woodland, and under that context as well. So that's why I'm on the panel today.
Okay, thank you very much to you all for giving us a bit of background here. So you're all on a slightly different journey in terms of your businesses and what you do. So I'd just like to ask the panel, do you think the government is doing enough to support sustainability and encourage it, or do you think they're actually hindering it in the actions they're taking?
Should I go first? Yeah. So I do have a bit of inside information. I sit on the aerial board, and I've been involved in the redesign of the new abuse support scheme. Conscious that because of that I do have maybe an awareness that I think, yes, government is doing a lot. Actually, I think they could do a bit more. My worry around the conditionality, so hopefully you all know, can you all hear me? This feels like it's not working. Hopefully you all know that in 25-26, 50% of your current subsidy is going and will become conditional. And you're going to have to do some environmental stuff to get that 50%. My worry is that what is considered to be regenerative sustainable farming, which is now there's a commitment to actually define that. We didn't have a definition for regenerative agriculture from the Scottish Government. In the latest agricultural bill, they've committed to actually defining that, awaiting that definition to appear, hopefully sometime soon. My concern is that those conditions are going to be too easy to tick off. That's what I'm worried about, because we know that we are not on track to halt the loss of biodiversity by 2030. We're mandated to have to address that. We have statutory requirement to halt that loss of biodiversity. We also have to significantly address carbon emissions. So yeah, I think there is a concern that the conditionality is going to be too easy to achieve. And what I really hope is that actually what is done is a payment structure that means that yes, it might be difficult to do, but that you're appropriately remunerated to do that, with additional wraparound knowledge exchange support and knowledge transfer support, and other aspects that will come in through tier 4, which is a kind of broader rural development programme. So I think, yeah, my concern is that there's going to be too much pressure put on government to take it easy. I think we have to, as a sector, be bold, and we have to say, yes, we can step up to that challenge, and we have to start doing some of that now to prove that we know what we're doing and that we're not waiting for someone to come and tell us how to do it. And there are many, many people, I'm sure many of you already are, engaging in that. But yeah, I think hopefully there is a risk that there's a lack of ambition, but I think there are plenty of good people contributing to the discussion enough that will push that forward.
Yeah, so look, it's topical, isn't it? I mean, call ourselves regenerative, or kind of don't. It's once you start down the line, there really is no way back, and it's a sort of knock-on effect. You start pulling things out, you go down the no fungicide route, you end up having to pull back on nitrogen. There's just no choice once you're in it, you just end up keeping on going. The difficulty we see with it is that, the government side of it's fine, but actually it's not a big influence to me. I mean, we don't get BPS in any of our agreements, I don't get BPS, so really I couldn't care less what happens to it. But the glimmer of hope that I do have for it is the bits that I see for our side of it that are coming in, we're already doing that. So that actually brings the BPS into a lot of our agreements. So in the contract farming and share farming, we'll actually see an increase in the total pot to be split for a start, which will help undoubtedly with cash flow. But on top of that, you've got and it's really difficult for government. So we all sit around the room and think we produce food. We don't, we produce alcohol in the cereal world. Right, now how long is the government going to carry on subsidising alcohol production? Now the government can't influence markets, so when you start off at it, that just now we have distilling in Scotland. That's what we have, we produce alcohol. You want to go against that? I grow Group 1 milling wheat, I try, every year to make bread quality because I want to produce food. We've got a massive deal with Quaker Oats, we store for Quaker Oats. We are trying our damnedest to produce food off the land. We've tried the Scottish Government to get back and get protein strategy to try and get beans off the ground. We need dehulling plants in Scotland. We need to start and actually take markets forward. But it's so difficult to come in there as a group and say, well, right, great, you know, we can have 4,000 or 5,000 tonnes of beans. What are you going to do with them? We've got the biggest seafood industry and salmon industry in the world on our doorstep, and all of the food comes from the south of England. And yet we produce it in Scotland. So all of it goes south, processed, back north. And we're totally missing out on that because it's on our doorstep. Can't access it. Go to Scottish Government, can we process the food for fish food? No, not a chance. Can't influence the market. So we're going about sustainability. The market is the first thing. You grow to your market. Same with potatoes, any of the guys who sell potatoes, all the rest of it. You've got to hit the market, you've got to hit spec, or you're not in business. It's pretty simple. What the government does, difficult job. I see glimmers of hope in it, and I really hope it does come off because they have really ticked the boxes. I'm nervous, Nikki, when you say that they're going to take the sort of wussy way out of regen. Like, there is only one way, and once you're in it, you know what it is. But for somebody to rip that off of 7 years of a punt and a lot of money and a lot of effort of my time, that is pretty difficult to sort of want to understand. And ultimately, cash is king, isn't it? So you've got to make money, you've got to supply the market, you've got to get the money in.
Thanks. Kind of, as an accountant, clearly I look at the numbers, and as Chris has said and Nikki said, the loss of BPS and the different tier systems we've brought in are clearly a factor in a number of clients who are reliant on BPS. So clearly the new tier system will force more people down the regen route to get the tier 3 and tier 4 funding. So I think the government are working at it, but I think we could do a lot better, certainly as far as the sustainability is concerned.
It's that age-old problem, isn't it? Government policy is rigid, and our land is not. It's diverse, and that's key to our food security. And it's really difficult to communicate that need for the space to let us farm the way that we want to farm, to let us try things as young farmers and give us the space to try and do things differently, and to farm the solutions essentially to big problems that we're facing in this time at the moment. So it's myself. We didn't go down any system. We didn't go for subsidy because we needed that ability to be creative and to be flexible, to make things work under that context. And I think if we had tried to meet any sort of criteria, then we would never have been able to get to where we got to in the end. So we do need to build that in. The only way we can build that in is if we contribute essentially as young farmers and say and communicate to the government and say we need something here that works for us so that we can really get our teeth into to solving these problems on our own. Because let's be honest, the people who are best placed to understand the land and are best placed to deal with these situations are the people that are there right now and working it day in, day out. And there's got to be that kind of trust, and it doesn't feel like that's happening at the moment.
Okay, thank you all very much. So I think it's been probably quite a well talked about topic in the last few months regarding tree planting and the amount of land that's been put into that. So I'd just like to ask the panel, how big a role do you see for trees in the sustainability of agriculture, and maybe is there a role in the carbon capture system maybe overinflated? I think maybe start with David on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the carbon capture system in general is overstated. It's really difficult because to actually create a metric where that kind of works, because let's be honest, what the science tells us that our land is breathing in and breathing out all the time. Capture isn't, carbon is not a stable component of the land. Yes, trees have a role, but we've got to make them work within our systems. You know, they've got to serve a purpose. And the wonderful thing with trees is that they are diverse in the amount of roles and how, you know, there's a whole multitude of ways that you can incorporate trees into the landscape. But at the moment, with our schemes, that we're seeing too much of people that are just solely going after those finite revenues that come with reforestation, that aren't trying to incorporate a just transition within their models. Are not thinking to the future, they're thinking to the now, thinking for the next 10 years. But then, you know, 10 years' time, what's that land going to look like? What's going to happen when the deer fences crumble? Deer fences don't last that long. What does the land return to? Does it get passed on? Does it go elsewhere? And then who's coming in next? What are they stuck with? And is there opportunity there? And the sort of glimmer of hope within all that is that for the people coming in next, in these areas are possibly going to be the most accessible for new entrants into agriculture, because as soon as you take the payments away from the tree planting and the carbon, then it does drop the price of the land down. And if there is a possibility to come in there and farm and be productive within that space, then, you know, that could be a really attractive thing for people. But at the moment, there's not enough people trying new things to go and I don't know, I guess sort of pave the way to doing that. So yeah, I mean, we should all be doing a bit more tree planting. Trees are great. Like, and most of our animals that we farm evolved in, you know, woodland systems, and have a connection with those sort of systems, and it does connect with their health, with their well-being, and give them a multitude of boosts, and therefore does, you know, anything that helps them helps you as the farmer as well. So it can possibly lower your reliance on other things. So there is a lot of ways that we can incorporate trees into farming. So it just needs to be better understood, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We've not seen many of our clients planting whole farm trees, but they have really embraced trees. So we've got farmers putting in shelter belts in corners of fields or body land. So it really depends on the circumstances. And I think in the last 10 years, there's been a lot more trees planted than there was in the previous 20, 30 years. So it's certainly going in the right direction as well, in terms of the tree planting. It's those areas, it's the right tree in the right place, and just what we need to do there.
So trees are kind of difficult for an arable farmer, but interestingly, you can learn a lot from them. I mean, trees work with no input, so you know, there's the first thing. You go and chuck a lot of stuff on the ground, and you realise that trees don't need it for a start. But a couple of instances, so a good friend, they got his farm offered to him by the Clue, and wild little bugger he is. He actually turned around and he planted half the hill in trees and sold it to one of these carbon daft companies that wanted it. But he paid off half the farm straight away. You know, so there are things in trees that you don't miss at your peril. One of the farms we happen to be farming just outside Edinburgh, is, you know, a bit of a rubbish farm, to be perfectly honest, probably going to be developed just in the corner of Mayfield, which is not a nice place to live at desert times. Farm came up for sale, about 300 acres. Nobody bought it, funnily enough, who would, and it ended up they had to reduce the price, Lord Rafe, to actually sell it. And it went for about £3,000 an acre. You know, compared to the rest of East Lothian, which has hit the headlines for 20 grand an acre. £3 an acre, I should have bought it. And I watched this one, very astute guy. It had 3 woods on it with oak in it. Now he probably paid off half that farm straight away because he knew the value of the wood that was in there, and that's before you even get into the carbon that's in it. You know, and now we start to see bits of it, and it's led me to look at it, unproductive parts. It's like, you've got to get the trees back in them. You know, if there's grants there for it, why not get the trees in? The carbon side of it, yeah, that gets tricky. I mean, I've been to enough talks on that, and you think you can only sell the carbon once. That doesn't sit well with me, but it's a lot of money, I get it. The Lothians is funny, we've got a lot of guys that will come out there, spend £1 million, get your 100 acre, get a big farmhouse to go with it. Recently, they've started actually, so that was quite an in for us, we quite happily go and farm 100 acres with quite good ground. Now they've planted it in trees and sold the carbon. So we see that, you know, it can be a threat, it can be a plus. We get it, we need trees, we get it to breathe, you know, we absorb, but then you don't see any of that good when you cut them down, so it's a tricky one, it's renewable, but yeah, financially I think there's a lot in trees, and definitely when we go around the farm now, look at what wood's there before we can go any further.
It's going to do a bit of audience participation now. So, in a wild system, how much of a cow, an adult cow, how much of a diet do you think would come from a tree? What percentage? You're quiet, aren't you? It's a free bar. Any percentage? 20? Any other offers? About a 10 and a 20%. Yeah, between 20 and 30%. For a wild setting for a cow, between 20 and 30% of her forage intake should come from trees. What about sheep? What percentage for sheep?
5.
40. Between 30 and 40%. Yeah. Goats, 40 for sure. Sheep, between 30 and 40. And what we did was we put them in square fields full of grass with no access to trees. So these ruminants have evolved to thrive and to get all of their nutritional requirements from grass, from other plants in the sward, so herbs, different forms, from tree browse, from hedge browse, from scrub browse. And what we did was we got rid of all the trees in the scrub because the Common Agricultural Policy said that that wasn't productive. And then we started spending loads of money on minerals. So there's some brilliant research that was done by Nottingham University, a guy called Nigel Kendall, who's at the vet school, and he compared, was looking at cobalt. Cobalt, if any of you are sheep farmers, you'll know that you need cobalt. They did no treatment for lambs, they did a dredge treatment for lambs, and then they fed willow to lambs. There was no difference in the blood plasma levels of cobalt between no treatment and a drench. That's wasted cash. That money you're spending on drench didn't have any effect. There was a significant difference, though, with the feeding of willow. And what they found was that they could completely remove the need for any cobalt mineral additions or supplementation by feeding willow. So in a future where it's going to become more and more difficult for us to justify the social licence to manage the land in the way that we do, and it's likely that we will lose even more public funding because it's just inevitable, we have to find better, not only cheaper ways of running our systems, but more environmentally beneficial as well. So willow, if any of you are thinking about planting up some scrubby, wet, damp corners, willow is amazing. Yes, those of you that have got field drains will get all upset about the roots getting in them, but there are so many benefits of willow. It's got salicylic acid in it, which is like aspirin, so it's a natural pain relief. There's some brilliant examples of dairy farms down south who are putting in willow strips all along their walkways, so that as the cows coming in for milking, they can just grab a mouthful of willow, and it can help them significantly reduce issues around lameness and also mastitis. So all of these things contribute to your bottom line, and for me, running a business without any subsidy support, I have to make sure that it makes financial sense. But also working with other people's land, I have to make sure that there is a landscape that they're going to enjoy, that they're going to be positive about. And often people really like to see trees in the landscape. I think both David and I couldn't have started our businesses without trees. Both of us kind of absolutely rely on wooded areas for shelter. Our cattle are grazed outside all year round. We're at 400 metres above sea level on the edge of Cairngorms. Trees allow me to do that by making sure that I've got plenty of shelter. So I think we need to stop just thinking about them as being hedges and edges features on our farms and actually recognise the role they can play in field. There's a new agroforestry option, which not only allows you to plant trees, but they can be fruit and nut trees, so you can get additional food from them. If I have to hear one more person say you can't eat trees, I'm just going to throw apples at them. So I think there are options now that are coming in that create opportunity there for diversification. So if any of you are involved in agritourism, you go down an agroforestry option, you put in fruit and nut trees. What a nice experience for people who come to your farm through agritourism to then go and maybe pick some fruit or pick some nuts. So all of these things can add value to your farm. And not only can they add financial value, they can also add additional value to reducing risks around fertility through heat stress. So we're getting hotter summers, fertility is going to be a significant issue. For our animals, if they're out in that hot sun, if we've got trees to give them shelter, this is going to become even more challenging for those of you who are claiming the calf payment, because if it's related to calving interval, you need fertility to be up here so that you're getting your calving interval appropriate to get your payment. So all these things are going to start getting related. And what we can do is wring our hands and say, oh, it's terrible, government are making it too difficult. Or we can immediately start taking action to actually think forward about what we need to do now, whether that's planting trees or changing the design of our farm, so that we can get our animals to access more of what they need from natural sources. And trees are a really, really good way to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a point to the audience, I'll come round and ask for questions from the floor in the next few minutes. So I'm just going to ask a kind of icebreaker question, just to kind of bring the tone back down again, a bit more kind of light-hearted. So if you weren't in the job you're in now, what would you be doing?
I would probably be in a warmer climate somewhere, running a vineyard down in South France or something.
No idea. I spent 12 years as a rural postman, so chatting to farmers every day, delivering mail to support myself going through university and you know, if anybody's working, was worked in conservation before, but it's very, very difficult to get a foothold in conservation. You have to spend a lot of time working for nothing, essentially. And eventually someone started paying you for it. So it'd probably be in conservation, but it's very difficult to do.
I'm probably going to say lost would be the honest answer, isn't it? No, probably 50-50 engineering would have been my thing, but as we said, definitely in a warmer climate. I think biggest regret was coming back from New Zealand, I would have said. Never have done it, but you're daft at that point, homesick. So, you know, I think once you spread the wings, you probably should have been a bit ballsier and stayed there and just got to grips with it a wee bit. So if you do get the opportunity, bloody well take it.
Yeah, as a pale redhead, warmer climate's not really suited to me, which is why I'm in 57 degrees north. So if I pulled my finger out at school and got the grades that I was capable of getting, I'd be a farm vet. My first proper job was as a prison officer, so I actually really enjoyed it, but I was too young and it was very stressful, but there were parts of it that I really loved, so maybe I would still be working in the criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you all very much. So we'll now move to ask for questions from the audience. So does someone have a question they'd like to ask? Mary?
The panel, various members of the panel have mentioned the term regenerative tonight, and I think there's a lot of farmers who consider regenerative to be probably what some people see as a traditional farming system, where the livestock complements the arable and the arable complements the livestock, the return of organic manures to the ground. So I would ask the panel of what would they, if they could have an influence on the definition of regenerative within the Scottish Government Code of Practice, what would they like to see within that definition?
Okay, we'll start off with Chris.
Right, let's try not to get a rant on here, we'll save that for tomorrow. Right, the easiest way, you need a level platform, so I get this thing, you know, as time goes on, this is 10 years I've been looking at it, I get really annoyed that I feel like I've been fleeced. You know, farm managers in here is like, you know, I was at the top of the game, I think. We're hitting the big yields, profitability, everything else, absolutely brilliant. Went down this route, thought I've had 20 years of my life, done it, next 20 years, or the last 20 years, it's going to be going down this route to see if I can make it work. You know, the guys that did Mintel, that's what they're like, right, no-till, here we go, regenerative. First thing we've got, broad acre arable stuff, no fences, it's not going to happen with livestock, pretty difficult. We're now getting there, we've got a couple of guys on with us that will come in and graze in the winter time. We're trying to come up with a system that actually makes him money, not focusing on us, because the land's there in the winter, it's not doing anything, it's going to get no-till. Let's make him some money. So we are trying that. What we don't want to see is the agri sales coming into it, and that is really difficult. If you think of something in agriculture that hasn't been touched from the bottom to the top, and that is really difficult. So all these fungicides have been tried out, and they know exactly where to price it for you to make money, for them to make money, for everyone else. And that's a really hard bit. So I'd like to see a really even playing field whereby all the inputs can be self-got from on-farm composting, whether it's from trees, from nettles, because ultimately that's where it comes from. Off you go, make your own brews, so you're not relying on the ag chem industry. They've got too big a hold on us, and it really is frightening how much control they have. Seeds, ferts, sprays, your trouble is that half the budget is an ag chem.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about kind of an assumption that mixed farming is the same as livestock integration, which by definition it can't be. So livestock integration means that you integrate the animals into the arable rotation, not just like a muck for straw kind of exchange. That isn't necessarily considered to be within the regenerative paradigm, because the way that you achieve those things might not be aligned with the regenerative principles. So what I always talk about is regenerative principles, not practices. So just going min-till doesn't suddenly make you regenerative. It's not, it's part of an aspect aligned with a principle. There are lots of people who are engaged in the kind of regenerative movement who are every now and then having to plough, but they're doing it with a knowledge intensity that allows them to make that decision based on the wider system. And I think that's what's really important. This is not, and this is where it becomes difficult, because this is kind of stuff that I'm researching at the moment for my PhD, and what is interesting is that again and again what comes out is that it's a series of principles, and it's about not what you do but how you bring those ideas together and how you create justifications for your practice. So we need to move away from this idea that if I do these 5 things I'm regenerative. It's more about if I think this way about these 5 things, I'm probably moving down more of a regenerative route. There are some very clear and easy ways to explore what those principles are. I would really recommend looking at the Groundswell website. You can actually get a tea towel with this on. But basically it's the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture. I would really also recommend that you try and get to Groundswell next year. It's down near London. It's a bit of a trek. It's the week after the Highland Show. And it's really worth coming down for a couple of days. It's not a conference, it's more of a festival, but it's definitely ag focused, and there's always a really, really good views up on the 3 nights that it's across. So I would definitely recommend coming. And their website will set out the 5 kind of principles. If you're interested in taking that a little bit deeper, I recommend reading Nicole Masters' book, For the Love of Soil. And she also talks about action enabling factors. So it's not just about the kind of stuff that you're doing on your farm, but also the way you're thinking about it, and are there things that you need to change the way you think in order for you to take action towards those goals. The key thing that I would say is that you need to know what you're managing for. So this kind of regenerative stuff is really knowledge intensive. It's not just about, oh well, I need to make money. Okay, cool, that's a good starting point. How much money? Why do you need that? Is that because of particular requirements? Is that to service debts? Actually, do you need those debts? Are you looking to get rid of those? So we're always within this kind of regenerative movement looking to ask more and more questions. And that's when people get annoyed and go, well, this isn't a real thing, it doesn't make sense. Normally because they come up against a tricky question. And it becomes a bit crunchy and a bit spicy and they don't want to answer. So I would say kind of embrace the vagueness of it. And as a pal of mine, Alistair Trickett, said, when people go, there's no such thing as regen ag, it's what we've been doing for hundreds of years. It can't be both. It's either what you've been doing for hundreds of years, or there's no such thing as it. You can't have it both ways. So you need to decide which camp you're in. And then I would recommend, given that there's 3 of us up here who are making a profit without subsidy, that there's, I'm not saying it's causation, it might just be correlation, but there is an argument potentially for slightly shifting the way that you're thinking.
I'm actually going to stick to the lane here. I'm an accountant, not an agronomist, so I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Yes, Scottish Government wants to become world leaders in regenerative and sustainable agriculture. It has turned into a bit of a buzzword, and I think Nikki covered it really, really well. So it's difficult to really kind of add on that. Personally, it is about really well defining your context. What is the sort of lifestyle that you want to create for yourself? Because it's not just about being environmentally regenerative, it has to be socially regenerative and personally regenerative as well. You have to actually enjoy your job. I know that's difficult to sort of think about at times, but you've got to enjoy what you do and have a passion for it. So you've got to really clearly define your context and then move forward from that. there are sort of, you know, as you said, there's principles and things to work into. There's things that set regenerative agriculture apart and give you something to aim for. And there's things that people greatly agree on in building soil and capturing carbon and mimicking natural practices. But for myself, it would just, we would never have got to where we got to if we did not really kind of stick to a kind of strict low impact way of creating our infrastructure and setting ourselves up and then continuing on from there. So really looking at low inputs, low oil, low technology, and then going from there. And that worked for us, but it's not going to work for everybody. But regenerative agriculture is there for you to define, and I think that's why it was never really given a solid definition. What is annoying is when you see people when you see like big corporations and things like that taking regenerative agriculture and saying, you know, we've changed. I don't know. We take our cows and tell them not to produce as much methane, and that's what makes us regenerative. It doesn't. It's a bit kind of it's a term for like use it greenwashing, but it's Bill's giggles really. It's not very good, but yeah. Regenerative agriculture is there for you to define.
Okay, thank you very much. Could we have another question from the audience, please? David was first.
There's been a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture, biodiversity, carbon capture and stuff like that. In order to sustainability, do you not think the most important thing for a farm business is to produce high quality, high volume of highly nourished food for an ever growing population?
Okay, we'll start with John on this one.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Clearly the role of the farmer is to produce food, and the issue there is to be sustainable you need to leave the asset in a condition for future generations. So there's a bit of a balance here between intensively producing the food now and the sacrifice of draining the land of all nutrients for future generations. So I think there's that balance there that we need to get right, and I suspect that's why it's being addressed just now.
Definitely, I think there's a bit of a misconception about regenerative agriculture and it being less productive, and I think there's a lot of people that are really proving that wrong. But then, with where we are at the moment, are we feeding people? I think is the issue of production. Are we producing enough? We probably are producing enough, but is it getting to the right people? Is it getting to people at the right price? Is it getting to people locally? Are we relying too heavily on, you know, produce that's being shipped overseas and done so in an unsustainable way? We do need to be feeding people locally from the land and creating better systems, and I think there is an opportunity here within the agricultural world to maybe sort of move towards or find ways of creating our own systems within our own agricultural systems. Doing something a little bit better and sort of closing that loop.
Well, look, I could sit here and say, yeah, absolutely great, but I'm not. I'm going to say no and challenge it. We didn't produce food. It's not our job to produce food. We've got a market and you've got to hit spec. The biggest problem we have got is that we have a processor in the middle, right? So you don't produce beef, you don't produce anything that goes on the shelf. The processor does, and that is the issue. You've got Tesco's in the middle there that are absolutely creaming everything out of us, and they're changing and processing the product, adding God knows what, and it's landed on the shelves, and we're all taking the fall for that. You know, people think they're eating beef. They're not eating beef, they're eating goodness knows what Tesco's want to make them eat. You know, half of it's horse meat, goat meat, you know, so no, we don't produce food, we have no control over it, you don't control the market, you don't control the industry. You're a producer that produces a spec and that's it. If you're happy with that, be happy with that. I'm trying to produce food, I don't produce food, my market is alcohol, I hate it, I can't influence it, so what are we going to do about it collectively? But don't sit there and think we produce food and we do a great job, because we don't. without getting frank about it, we don't, we really don't. There's too many people in the middle that are just taking us for a while.
I can't add much more because I totally agree. What I would say as well is that we don't necessarily have a growing population. Globally, there's potentially going to be a growing population boom, going up to 10 billion. In Scotland and across the UK, our population is becoming more static. We have to get away from this idea that we're leading the world, because we're not. We're this tiny country that really needs to focus inwards and think more about how we produce more fruit and veg and pulses, lentils, beans, that sort of thing, legumes, here that we can either feed to people or that we can feed to animals that we can then eat locally. Less than, as you were saying, less than 20% of the grain that is grown in Scotland is eaten by people. Over 80% either goes into livestock, ruminants that don't actually need grain, and increases the risk of acidosis, also increases other health risks for livestock, and ends up with a less nutritious product. Because I think that's a really interesting point you said about plentiful, nutritious food. You take a grain finished piece of ribeye, grain finished, and you compare it to 100% pasture fed. One is protective of health, the other actually can be a risk to health because of the omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. And there's loads of research out there to tell us this. But because we're bought into this system where we're having to produce for the middle guy, if you like, for that processor, we've kind of become set on this path dependency where we just have to keep growing the same thing and doing the same thing and not able to get off that treadmill. I'm hugely privileged to be able to sell direct. It's bloody hard. For any of you that are selling direct, just don't. It's so hard. Find yourself a cooperative. Find a way that you can contribute and you can work in collaboration with others. Selling your product direct to the person, to the consumer, not your customer, because your customer for most of you is going to be someone in the middle. It's going to be some big corporate. If you can actually get your food to the consumer, it's so hard. The biggest cost in my business is butchery and getting that animal from a live animal onto people's plates. That's the most expensive part of my business. And it's hard. So if we can find ways of making that bit easier, we definitely have much more chance of doing exactly what you said, which is producing healthy, nutritious food to feed our population. That's the bit that we really need to focus on, is the supply chain.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, please.
Two of you have spoken about improving the ecology and biodiversity of your farms, but how important is soil health to your farming systems? And what new measures have you introduced to improve it in the last few years? And also, what are your key soil health indicators that you use?
That's a good question.
Isn't it? So probably spend a lot of time kicking myself for being so daft. So where have we been? Probably when you go down the hotel room, it's pretty easy to say you get no profit, no nothing, which does happen if you get it wrong. But once you get into it, by year 3, if you don't take too many risks, it probably is the happiest you'll ever be. When it works and you've done absolutely nothing, one pass, you put the seed in the ground, and out it comes, and you've got a crop out of it, it is the best feeling ever. The soil health comes from it. It just happens as you go through the process. We have plenty of measures in there, so I basically had to go back to school and reteach myself how to read soil, because what I thought I knew I didn't. And it's pretty simple. We've got the big 5 elements in there, so everything in the world goes back to the periodic table. Everything. So pH isn't on the periodic table in case you didn't notice, so think again. So you think you know what soil is and what it does? No, you don't. You need to go back and really look at it, what we've been sold as a sales pitch, and it's based around the inputs that go with that sales pitch. So once you pull yourself out of that, then you can start doing soil health. Now we do look at it, the diversity of it. I mean, I'm big in pulses, director of the pea group, and we grow beans as well. So we're big into peas and beans. That's the quickest way to regenerate it. Like, you get the legumes in there, that absolutely works. Cover crops, absolute struggle. My God. I've seen to have put an awful lot of seed in the ground and nothing come back out of it from cover crops. There's too much research now that would prove that it's actually a negative. So the route that we've had to go down now is to work with our grazier to actually figure out what he wants for the sheep for the winter. And I'm quite happy now that he'll pay so much headage per week if he can get the grazing and they'll put on weight, because the last couple of years we've done it, by the time we get to February they actually start burning too much calories and there's just no efficient. So, everyone's got to work for people, but Yeah, when you start looking at measures, the problem is the comparatives, they're not right. So when you go down regen, you get that far down it, you start looking at ratios, and the ratios are important. You soil test every year, variable rates, the biggest load of crap ever, and it doesn't work. P&K was a sales pitch. It's great, it'll work for a part of it, you don't need it. And then you have to go down and reteach yourself. So what you're measuring against doesn't give you much to answer your question. But once you get that far down, you think you're right, you know you're right, but what are you measuring? And I dread to say the yield word, because that doesn't help us. But cash flow wise, we seem to be sitting more comfortable now than what we have been in the past. And now I think things are starting to line up and people are starting to look and see it. But it is difficult, definitely, to try and find a comparative to measure yourself against. And industry does not want regen. I will say that now. Like, you stand up and say half the stuff that I've just said, and oh my god, you will be shot down pretty quick.
From a livestock point of view, the most important thing you need to do is to create rest in the system to help your soils recover. So just get a back fence up, start subdividing, get some electric fence. Anyone who still sets stock in, just stop. We know that you can increase your productivity from your grass by 20% on a 21-day rotation, and then once you start doing that, it becomes addictive. You want to move your cows every day. You start creating longer rest periods. In some places, we're only grazing areas once a year, and we're able to then build a stockpile, and creating that stockpile where we've got deep roots into the ground, plenty of biomass above the soil, means that we're significantly contributing to increased soil carbon levels with cattle grazing. So that's a key thing. If you've got livestock, get some electric fence, start moving them. In terms of measurements, a really nice tool that I'd recommend is an app called Soil Mentor. You do have to pay for it, but you can access all their resources for free on their website. So it has all of their soil tests. It was developed in collaboration with Nicole Masters, who's just like an absolute queen of regen. And there's lots of different things like measuring your infiltration rate, because if you can see how quickly water infiltrates into your soil, it tells you lots about what's called connected porosity. I won't go off on a lesson now about it because I just won't stop, but it's really worth looking into. Exploring things like earthworm counts, it's a really simple one to do. Looking at the rooting depth, looking at whether you've got nodulation on your rhizomes, your root nodulation, so your legumes, so any sort of leguminous plant, whether it's clover, vetch, pea, bean, dig it up, have a look at the roots. They should have little round pink kind of nodules on them. If they haven't, you've got lazy legumes, so you're probably applying too much N and you don't need to, so it's a nice indicator. And there are other reasons why you might not be getting nodulation, but it's a really nice, quick, easy win. So in terms of actual practical stuff that you can go out and do, Soil Mentor is a really good resource to start.
I clearly can't add anything beyond what Nikki and I interested
Yes, I use Soil Mentor as well, actually. So there is a lot of citizen science that you can do to inform yourself about what you're doing. I also enjoy just getting into the microscope and looking at this microbiology because it's really fascinating. But I think observationally, it can feel really sort of geeky and sort of abstract. The moment that I knew that we could really clearly indicate that our soil health was improving is when we actually had to move away from using electric fencing in the woodland because the sward was growing up behind the pigs too fast and short-circuiting the electric fence out. If you're doing pigs, you have to have it just off the ground and nose height, and you're running it really hot or they're just going to ignore it. And I was having to string under a couple of meters of electric fence through the summer months, like every week, and it was not fun at all. So there are ways of showing yourself, but it does sort of require a bit of a leap of faith to make sure it's a well-informed one.
Okay, thank you. Paul, do we have any questions on Facebook?
Not currently, John.
No, currently. Okay, Ali, you got a question?
Yeah, we touched a wee bit on about moving away from set stocking. An issue that we've got in the industry is a lack of labour. How do we move away from set stocking, and how do we encourage, or how do we move away from set stocking if we don't have the labour there to influence it, and how do we then encourage more people into our industry?
Nikki, do you want to do this one first?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to say something that's going to make me really unpopular, really, like if I haven't already. I quite often wonder what a lot of farmers around me do all day. Like, yeah, see, I knew that. So, if all I have to do is move my animals every day, and I am a bit obsessed, I do move them every day, or my husband moves them, I move every single day. I haven't dosed an animal in 5 years, so I've suddenly cut out that labour, having to bring them all in. I'm not having to worry about feed because I just cull out. So I've just got a super, super harsh culling policy. If it needs me to go near it when it's calving, she's gone down the road, doesn't get a second, and nothing gets a second chance in our system. So for me, cutting out all the reasons why you need labour is the first thing that you need to do to get rid of that labour requirement. I totally recognise there is a labour crisis in the sector, but there are things that you can do by moving animals more frequently that offset labour that you might require elsewhere in the system. I think that's the most important thing to do. And what I would say before any change in the system is to do a full cost-benefit analysis, understand what you're actually spending your money on, and then work out if the change can help you save. Because I think sometimes we think, I've got to do all the things that I'm doing now and move animals. But actually, we can get through, we outwinter, as I said, so I haven't got to worry about any housing, so I'm not having to scrape anywhere, I'm not having to move muck. All of that disappears because I'm moving animals every day and I'm making the most of stockpile grazing, which also means that I hardly need to make any conserved forage. We budget 3 bales of hay per head for the whole winter for the animals. The rest of it is stockpile. So suddenly, by creating rest in the system, by moving animals more frequently, and I will accept that I'm at the extreme end of that, that you can just cut so many other costs out and you can cut so many other labour requirements out, and actually you get to a sweet spot where the size of your parks and the size of your flock or herd eventually get to become more aligned, and actually all you're doing is just opening a gate without having to put subdivisions in. If you can get to that point, then you're absolutely onto a winner. So yeah, it's a good point, but I think there are ways to do a cost-benefit analysis that you could manage out those things.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, I think the answer for that has to be technology. You know, it is going really, really quick. You know, you've got, I mean, even I say, like, loads of these apps, ear tags, GPS, going straight back to apps. It's coming. It's not quick enough to get to the livestock guys, but it is coming. The second part of that is the labour issue. Now, we really don't struggle for labour at all, because we have a slightly different model to it, that we don't want to own every part of the job. So you've got to look at what it is you're offering, and actually why would somebody want to work there. So it's generally not about money. What we find is about time and the way of life, and them getting out of it what they want. Generally people want to be their own boss, they want their own little bit of business, and they want to be in control. So you have to offer that. So realistically, if you're needing labour, you need to be offering something that people will want. So in my world, it's like, well, why would I have a tractor when I can pick up the phone and get somebody to come with a tractor? It's pretty simple. You know, so we will advertise the job that we need done, not advertise for the person, and we generally find that that gets satisfied pretty quick. We've just gone into doing our own haulage now, stupidly, but I mean, that got filled really quick. You know, the girl that's taking it on, she wants to start at 5 in the morning, just let her, I don't care, I don't really want to hear from you unless there's a problem. But that's her side of it. She'll be finished by 3 in the afternoon, she's home for a wee one. That's absolutely fine by me, as long as she's done 2 loads, job done. It just depends how you look at it, but we are not good at managing time, and it's time that people want. So you've got to look at your labour profile and your time, and as Nikki says, change the business, put in electric gates, whatever you've got to do that is more efficient with time.
Yeah, I mean, as far as labour is concerned on farms, it's very much they're looking for flexibility. So it's more, from the clients that we see, it's more the contractors they're using as opposed to directly employed labour, and that gives them flexibility to move around farms and work when they want to work, as opposed to being stuck with one employer. So that's probably one way of covering the labour costs.
Why don't people want to work in farms? Why don't people want to get out of the cities are depressing as hell? And who can you want it's just such a difference to your lifestyle and the benefits that you have in just being out of that situation, and more people wanting to get out of the situation. For the job that I did for, there was I think there was over 1,000 people applying for the job. And then it was a whole process to to go ahead and get it. Like it was, maybe there is people who want to get out of the city and want to do something, and maybe we have to be looking at what is amiss that we're not making this an attractive prospect for young people to get into. I think there's this misconception, crossing the urban-rural divide, where your farmer is still sort of seen as your sort of peasant farmer, that it is a profession that's kind of beneath people in some way at times, and it's that we're not keeping up with times, and maybe it is part of an image sort of thing at times. We should be trying to get as many more people into farming as we possibly can, because if you look at the Scottish Consensus came out, the population of the Hebrides down by 5% in that one consensus. We are still diminishing our rural population, and I don't understand why, because we've got everything to offer.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up tonight's panel. Do we have one more?
Nikki, you talked there also we need to eat more fruit and veg. I've visited a few farms that went down the regenerative route, and part of what they've done is taking the fruit, veg and potatoes out of the rotation. How do we make that work going forward?
If every farm in Scotland put 2 acres aside for a market garden, we wouldn't require the field scale veg that we currently require. You're absolutely right. Root vegetables are absolutely hammering our soils. That whole system, I was talking to someone earlier this week, and she's just almost in tears, like desperate to get her soils better. But she's like, we have contracts to meet, we've got to grow these tassels, we've got to grow these root crops. It's horrendous, the challenge that I think is out there. It's really interesting, McCain, who put forward a regenerative framework, but maybe some of you are aware of that. I question how effective it's going to be. But I think the challenge is actually that growing veg at that scale, because of the way it's been mechanised and the way that we need to do it to meet that spec. I mean, I'm not a veg grower, so I'm probably the last person to talk about it, but I think it's a reversion of scale. We need to rethink the scale issue. We need to rethink about people accessing land. That doesn't mean we'll be able to sell our little 2 acre plots to people. We could work more in collaboration. Some interesting research that I was listening to earlier today, Professor Van Ness, who's been at Cornell University in the States for 40 years researching soils. The highest soil carbon levels in the US, particularly in the state of New York that they were looking at, and the healthiest soil across most metrics is pasture under grass. The second is in these kind of small-scale horticultural market gardens. That's where the second best soils are, and everything else then dips significantly after that. So I think the soil health is telling us the way that we probably need to go. The challenge is how we create, as I said earlier, the processing the supply chain and the access to that food further down the route. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, probably, we see a lot of veg. We've got veg, we're not in control of that part, unfortunately, because it's out with most farming agreements. It is a tricky one. It has to go indoors, it has to go vertical farming. I can't see a future in it. I really just can't. The potato guys, generally, we'll try and work with the newer entrants, the smaller scale, the salad potato ones, because they're generally not going to make a mess because they don't want to lose the land. On that side of it, there's not a lot you can do. If the landowner wants potatoes to pay his money, you've got to go with it. Yes, it does set you back, but done well, it can be a good point to turn over for weeds. You've got a hell of a diversity in there, so it can be a very valuable reset button. The veg side of it, we do a bit of veg. We've got Drysdale's down with us. They're doing quite good actually at getting down the regen. A lot of the products they use is not fungicide based, and they're not heavy on insecticide. A bit of a disaster last year, but they've got a traction right now. And they are going down a different tillage regime. It's no longer the full metal jacket, so it's getting there. When you put diesel up to £1.20, you no longer realise you can't carry on at that. So these guys get it, but I think ultimately it has to go vertical farming, doesn't it?
On Nikki's point, I visited a farm in just above Donegal not long ago, not an Agri farm, 2
Martha Garden, that was bringing in €70,000 in its second year of production. That's pretty, that was 42 two full-time jobs, and it's just on a little corner of somebody else's farm. That almost works into the previous question. Why not give people agency to share the land with you? It's a tricky thing to do. We worked with a forester who runs trainings for chainsaw and quad bike and forestry first aid, and we're keen to sort of bring other people into the space and let them. If they can seamlessly stack onto what we're doing, then why not bring more people in? It's just nice to see more people in your day-to-day working life, so that is a really good idea.
Okay, I'd just like to finish off the panel by thanking our 4 panel members very much for coming along tonight, giving up their time generously to give their take on sustainability within our sector. So thank you very much to Nikki, Chris, John and David for coming along tonight and giving up their time to do that. Thank you all very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'm sure the panels will be around for a little bit after the panel's finished. The bus is leaving the showground at 10:30 and I hope there's nothing depressing about Edinburgh tonight. And you're all very welcome to join us if you like. So as a token of appreciation, we have a little token. Thank you all for coming on tonight, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll just finish off by a huge round of applause for our panel.